Let's wind back the clock to the 1980s. Perfect. It's a good time for Star Trek. The death and resurrection of Spock in the second and third movies rejuvenates public interest in the franchise in the early years of the decade. In 1986, the fourth movie, The Voyage Home, is Star Trek's biggest box office success to date, a massive crossover hit. And in 1987, a brand new TV series, Star Trek The Next Generation, debuts in first-run syndication, introducing new characters to a new audience. What better way to close out a great decade for Star Trek than with one more movie, a follow-up to Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, a theatrical companion to Star Trek TNG, which, by the end of the 80s, is really starting to hit its stride on TV. And hey, those last two Star Trek movies, Star Trek III and Star Trek IV, they're directed by a member of the main cast, Leonard Nimoy, who plays Spock. After Star Trek IV is a hit, Nimoy directs another movie, a non-Star Trek movie, Three Men and a Baby, and it's a hit too. He's a director now, not just a Star Trek director, a director with a career. Star Trek's not just a nerdy sci-fi action-adventure series with an obsessive fan base, it's a reservoir of genuine talent. What's better than Spock directing a movie? Why, Captain Kirk directing a movie? So that's what happens. In June 1989, Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, directed by William Shatner, buddy, opens in theaters, and it's not great. It doesn't bomb at the box office exactly, but it fails to meet expectations. Its grosses drop off precipitously week to week, and ultimately, its wide theatrical release only lasts 10 weeks, which is the shortest wide release of any Star Trek movie to date. So, disappointing. And the reason it's so disappointing in terms of its box office performance is because most people who see it think it's pretty lousy. The movie is panned by critics and rejected by audiences. It even earns the lowest rating of any movie ever in the history of CinemaScore, B+. That was a CinemaScore joke, not a Star Trek joke. Star Trek V's actual CinemaScore rating was A-, which reinforces the premise of the joke. CinemaScore ratings ain't worth shit. Here's my point, though. Star Trek V was a critical and commercial failure. It was nominated for half a dozen Golden Raspberry Awards. It currently has a 23% critics rating and a 25% audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It is broadly considered the worst Star Trek movie ever made by multiple generations of fans, an embarrassing waste of film that some Trekkies still insist should not even be considered canon, but I think that negativity is way over the top. Have you watched Star Trek V lately? If not, maybe you should. I have, and I've watched it over and over again throughout my life, and I have a dissenting opinion. I'm not about to argue that Star Trek V is a good movie. Jesus Christ, it's definitely not that. Oh man, I'm not going to tell you it's good. However, I am going to tell you why Star Trek V is actually not as bad as you remember. The shape of Star Trek V, behind the camera and in terms of what we see on the screen, only really makes sense as a response to Star Trek IV. Because Leonard Nimoy got his shot at directing, and because Nimoy's films, especially Star Trek IV, were so successful, William Shatner wanted his turn. He demanded it, in fact. Shatner also demanded, and got, final story approval for the film. And, as for that story, one of the keys to the broad appeal of Star Trek IV was its easily accessible, high-concept story. Kirk and his crew travel back in time to the 1980s to save the whales. There's more to it than that when you actually watch the movie, of course, but the basic idea can be conveyed in a sentence. You don't need to have seen the earlier movies. You don't need to have watched any of the episodes of the TV show. You don't need to have even heard of Star Trek before. You can grasp what the movie's about and what the stakes are. It's simple. Presumably, the producers of Star Trek V wanted it to have a similarly simple, accessible, high-concept premise. And holy shit, did Shatner have one in mind. William Shatner's high concept for Star Trek V was, the Enterprise goes in search of God. More specifically, as Shatner himself has described in multiple interviews in the years since the film was released, the idea was that the Enterprise crew looks for God, but finds the devil. which at a basic level is not a bad premise, though if we interpret God and the devil as referring to literally those religious mythological beings, as apparently Shatner originally meant them to, maybe it's not the best premise for a Star Trek movie. But when it comes to making a good movie, or just telling a good story in any format, what matters most is execution. How did William Shatner and the rest of the Star Trek crew in front of and behind the camera turn this, let's say, ambitious premise into a movie? What actually happens in Star Trek V? We open on Nimbus 3, identified with the help of some snarky quotation marks as the planet of galactic peace. We meet this guy, a humble desert hole farmer, hard at his work, when a mysterious horseman rides up on him. Farmer John, that's not me making fun of him. According to the credits, the character's name is John, spelled J''ONN, Martian Manhunter style. Farmer John grabs his air-powered rock gun and turns it on the stranger. The stranger walks up to Farmer John and goes, "Come on, who are we kidding? I barely even feel a shot from that thing. Besides, you're really gonna shoot me over this field of holes? Come here, share your pain with me." My pain? Yeah, I've got this thing I do where people share their innermost secret pain with me, and then when it's over, they feel better and also join my cult. Sound good? John's like, shit, what else have I got going on? So he shares his pain with the stranger, and you know what? He does feel better. He's like, how can I ever repay you? And the stranger says, like I said, you can join my cult. Did I say cult? Quest. My quest is what you're joining. Ignore that other word I used. Anyway, I'm seeking ultimate knowledge, which we'll need a starship in order to find, but don't worry, I have a plan to bring a starship here. And the stranger pulls down his hood to reveal the distinctive ears of a Vulcan. And then he starts laughing. A Vulcan who laughs? But Vulcans never laugh. Except for Spock, who was laughing like every other week on Classic Trek, or crying, or getting mad. How reliable can your logic possibly be if it abandons you every time a flower sneezes in your face? Anyway, we cut to Earth, to Yosemite to be precise, where Captain Kirk is climbing the side of El Capitan, while Dr. McCoy is down below watching him through binoculars and having an anxiety attack. Spock zooms up on a pair of rocket boots to distract Kirk, which leads directly to Kirk losing his grip and falling. Luckily, Spock, who is personally responsible for Kirk falling in the first place, is able to catch Kirk before he splats into the base of the mountain. Back on Nimbus 3, the laughing Vulcan guy, whose name is Sybok, we don't know that yet, but I'm not going to keep calling him the laughing Vulcan guy, Sybok and his followers storm the gates of the main settlement, Paradise City. Boy, whoever named these places was in full-on bitter irony mode, weren't they? Sybok's people capture the 3 ambassadors stationed on this planet, human St. John Talbot, Klingon General Cord, and Romulan Caitlin Dar. Dar says to Sybok, okay, big shot, you fucked up now. Our governments won't stand for this. They'll stop at nothing to free us. You think they might even send a starship to rescue you? You bet your ass they will. And Sybok turns to Farmer John like, that's my plan. We cut to the Enterprise in space dock in Earth orbit, where Scotty is trying to work the kinks out of this new ship, which is apparently all kinks. Uhura shows up to gently scold Scotty for missing their date. Because they're dating now. Scotty and Uhura are fully fucking. That's in the movie. It doesn't matter if you like it or not. You have to accept it. Starfleet Command contacts the Enterprise and tells Uhura to recall the rest of the crew from shore leave because there's an emergency that demands their presence in the neutral zone. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are continuing their fun little camping trip, eating beans, getting drunk, singing in the round. Well, attempting to. Anyway, Spock doesn't join in because the lyrics to row, row, row your boat don't work for him. McCoy gives Kirk some shit about almost dying when he fell off the mountain earlier, but Kirk says, shut up, you soft old clucking hen. I knew I wasn't going to die. Because, see, you and Spock were with me, and I've always known that I'll die alone. How do you know that? I just know. Right, but based on what? Look, it pays off later, okay? I'm saying it now because it pays off later. Uhura shows up in a shuttlecraft. The transporters on the Enterprise aren't working. That's another kink that needs working out. The transporters are on the fritz. Uhura's fucking Scotty. The Enterprise is a kinky ship this time around. Anyway, Uhura collects Kirk, Spock, and McCoy and takes them back to the Enterprise and Kirk gets a call on the view screen from Starfleet Admiral Harve Bennett, who's like, Bill, I thought I told you this movie was a bad idea and I didn't want to be involved. Actually, he gives Kirk the rundown on the mission they've all been recalled from shore leave for. Some wacko has taken hostages on Nimbus 3, including the Federation, Klingon, and Romulan ambassadors. And since Kirk is the only experienced captain currently available, he's been ordered to take the Enterprise to Nimbus 3 and get those hostages back. While the Enterprise zooms to Nimbus 3, we check in on this guy, Captain Claw, a young Klingon apparently just flying around in his bird of prey, doing whatever he wants. Earlier, we saw him taking target practice on an old Earth space probe. He's just kind of bored. Then he hears the news about the hostage situation on Nimbus 3 and learns that Starfleet is sending the Enterprise. Claw orders his crew to set course for there, because if he can defeat Kirk in battle, he will be recognized as the greatest warrior in the galaxy. The rest of his crew is like, great, so let's go start a war so our captain can feel better about his dick size. It is the Klingon way. Back on the Enterprise, they watch a hostage tape recorded on Nimbus 3 where Sybok is like, I didn't want to have to do this shit, but I had no other choice. I just want to talk. Don't push me, man. Spock recognizes Sybok. A bit later, he meets privately with Kirk and McCoy in the observation room and informs them that he knows Sybok, that many years ago, Sybok was a brilliant student on Vulcan, but he was a radical. He rejected the logical discipline of other Vulcans and embraced emotion. So the Vulcan authorities were like, oh, to hell with that, and banished him. Is he your brother? No. Are you sure? I'm sure. It's not going to turn out that he's your brother later on? No. Okay. The Enterprise arrives at Nimbus 3. Kirk leads a team to the planet to rescue the hostages. They park the shuttlecraft a few miles away and steal some horses after Uhura distracts some guards with her Sally Rand tribute act. There's a fight once they get inside the Paradise City compound. Spock spooks a horse by going like, hey look, we have the same teeth! And then he puts it to sleep with a Vulcan nerve pinch. They enter the building where the hostages are being held. Kirk fights a cat lady and throws her into a pool of water, which I guess instantly kills her. And then the ambassadors appear and pull weapons on Kirk because, oh shit, they've been turned! They're Team Sybok now! Sybok loads everybody onto the shuttlecraft and they fly back to the Enterprise. Claw picks right then to show up with his bird of prey, so Sulu has to crash land the shuttle in the Enterprise's hangar so they can warp away moments ahead of Claw's torpedo. After the crash landing, there's a scuffle between Sybok and Kirk. Kirk's like, oh shit, Vulcans are super strong, I forgot, as Sybok slams him back and forth between a couple of shuttlecraft. One of the air-powered rock guns lands at Spock's feet. Spock picks it up and Kirk's like, shoot him! If you're close enough, you might break the skin! But Spock doesn't shoot him. Sybok says to Spock, you can either get locked up with your friends, or you can join my noble quest. Spock's like, go ahead and lock me up with my friends. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are thrown into a holding cell, and Kirk is like, hey, Spock, next time I tell you to shoot someone with an air gun that fires tiny pebbles, I expect you to goddamn do it. And Spock says, I couldn't shoot Sybok. He's my brother. I thought you didn't have a brother. Technically, he's my half-brother. Your half... Oh, this motherfucker here. There aren't any more never-before-mentioned siblings of yours running around out there right now, are there? No. Sybok works his share your pain mojo on the rest of the Enterprise crew and takes control of the ship. Meanwhile, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy try to break out of the cell but fail. Sybok gets on the intercom and makes an announcement. Hi everybody, it's me, Sybok. You're probably wondering why I hijacked the ship and locked Captain Kirk, Spock, and Dr. McCoy in the brig. Well, I promise I've got a really good reason, and here it is. We're going to the center of the galaxy to visit the planet where God lives. Isn't that neat? Kirk's like, okay, this guy is even more cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs than I thought he was. We gotta get out of here. Fortunately, Scotty, who hasn't been converted to Team Sybok yet, chooses this exact moment to blow a hole in the back wall of the cell and usher Kirk, Spock, and McCoy out of there. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy run to an empty elevator shaft so they can climb up to the observation room and send a distress call using the emergency transmitter in there. Scotty leaves them to immediately bump his head on a pipe and knock himself unconscious, whereupon he is captured by Team Sybok. With some help from Spock's wacky rocket boots, they make it up the elevator shaft and to the observation room. They send out their distress call, but unbeknownst to them, it's received by Captain Claw's ship. So now Claw knows where the Enterprise is and where it's going. Then Sybok walks in like, so you sent your distress call, feel better? He works his share your pain mojo on Dr. McCoy, forcing him to relive the memory of pulling the plug on his suffering, terminally ill father. Then Sybok shows Spock a vision of Spock's own birth, where Sarek was less than thrilled at the arrival of a half-human son. That's Sarek. What a prick. Then Sybok turns to Kirk like, your turn! But Kirk's like, nope! Not sharing my pain. I like my pain right where it is. Thank you very much. Hands off my pain, weirdo. Sybok gets word that they've arrived at the center of the galaxy. Kirk says, you can't go any farther. The center of the galaxy is surrounded by the Great Barrier and nothing can survive a journey through that. Sybok says, wrong. The danger of the Great Barrier is just a myth, like the sound barrier or the warp speed barrier or the friend zone. We'll make it through just fine, and then you'll realize that my vision was true when we meet God on the other side, and he says, hi, Sybok, glad you could make it. It's me, God. Everyone goes to the bridge for the trip through the Great Barrier, which, as Sybok predicted, is smooth sailing. Beyond the barrier, at the center of the galaxy, is a planet. And Sybok's like, see, there it is, Shakari, God's home planet. Who else but God would have a home planet at the center of the galaxy, huh? Checkmate, atheists. Sybok graciously returns control of the Enterprise to Kirk, and Kirk figures, well, shit, we're here anyway, so we might as well go meet God. Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Sybok hop on a shuttlecraft, and they fly down to the planet. They step out, and Sybok goes, it's amazing! Just like I knew it would be! Kirk's like, calm down, man, it's just San Bernardino County. They go for a little bit of a hike, and then finally Sybok is like, yo, God, are you home? And there's an earthquake, and columns of rock shoot up out of the ground, and a big blue floating head appears and says, hey, it's me, God! Did you have any trouble finding the place? Sybok explains that they were able to pass through the barrier easily thanks to the nifty starship they flew to get here. God's like, starship, eh? I could use a starship. Give me the starship. Sybok's like, you got it! But Kirk has noticed something kind of odd. He raises his hand and says, excuse me, but what does God need with a starship? God turns to Sybok like, who's your friend? Kirk's like, don't you know who I am? Aren't you God? And God's like, oh, I get it. You need proof. Okay, I can do that. I know I've got some proof around here somewhere. How about eye lightning? And he zaps Kirk. Then Spock mouths off, and God gives him a jolt of eye lightning too. God turns to McCoy like, you want some? Do you doubt me too? And McCoy says, I doubt any God that inflicts pain for his own pleasure. That covers a lot of them, actually. Sybok says, God, why are you being so uncool to my friends, man? We came a long way to be here. You came a long way to be here? Do you have any idea how long I've been trapped here? Now give me that starship so I can get out of here. Sybok says, that doesn't sound like God talk. Reveal yourself to me. And God changes his form to look like Sybok. What do you think of this? It's kind of like the last episode of The Prisoner, right? Spock gets up and says to Sybok, hey, I don't think this is the real God. Maybe we should go. But Sybok says, no, this is my fault. I brought us here. I put you all in danger. But don't worry, I'm going to fix it. Vulcan high five! And Sybok turns back to God and says, hey, God, share your pain with me, motherfucker! And Sybok and God have themselves a wrestling match. As they grapple, Kirk orders the Enterprise to fire a photon torpedo at their location. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy duck for cover as the torpedo strikes. It blows things up real good, killing Sybok, but the God being is still alive and he is pissed. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy run back to the shuttlecraft, but the battery is dead. Kirk calls Scotty on his communicator, and Scotty says the transporter has been repaired enough that he can beam two of them up. So Kirk immediately tells him to beam up Spock and McCoy. Those two get safely aboard, but before they can beam Kirk up, Claw's Klingon ship arrives on the scene, shooting the Enterprise and wrecking the transporters again. Spock and McCoy make it back to the bridge in time to see Claw on the view screen, demanding that they surrender Captain Kirk to him. Spock goes over to General Cord and says, you're his superior officer, tell him to knock this shit off. Cord says, he won't listen to me, I'm just a foolish old man. And Spock says, will you just do it? Christ. Kirk is still on the planet being chased by the pissed-off floating Godhead, but then the bird of prey appears in the sky, shoots the Godhead, apparently killing it for good. God is dead! Then Kirk squares off with the ship like, you want me, you Klingon bastards? Well, come get me! But instead of shooting him, the Klingon ship beams him aboard. And once he's on the ship, he realizes that General Cord is in charge now. Cord turns to Captain Claw like, "Do you have something you want to say to Captain Kirk?" "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For trying to blow up your ship and kill you." "And?" "And I won't do it again." Then Cord's like, "Kirk, say hello to our new gunner." And the chair spins around and it's Spock. Kirk's like, "Spock? I thought I was going to die down there." Spock says, "Impossible. You were never alone." Damn it, I wish McCoy was here. I told him that was going to pay off later. Kirk is so overcome with emotion that he goes in for a hug. But Spock cuts him off like, "Dude, come on. Not in front of the Klingons." Then they invite the Klingons to a mixer on the Enterprise, and everybody's having a great time celebrating the death of God. Spock's bummed about the annihilation of his brother Sybok. Kirk tells him, "You know, I lost a brother once. I was lucky I got him back." "Your brother Sam came back to life?" "I was talking about Spock, you whiskey-soaked yokel." Then we cut to Kirk, Spock, and McCoy resuming their interrupted camping trip from the beginning of the movie. Spock strums his Vulcan auto harp and joins in on "Row, row, row your boat" this time, and oh, what a good time they have. And it's a good time for us too, because that's the end of the movie. A lot of the humor is forced. The banter between Kirk and Spock in the rock climbing scene, another early scene with Sulu and Chekhov pretending to be caught in a snowstorm so Uhura doesn't find out they're lost in the woods, Scotty's pratfall when he walks into that pipe, etc. The main plot is silly and contrived and full of holes. The presence of Claw and the Klingon threat is the very definition of tacked on. Most of the action is awkwardly staged and not very exciting, and the climax with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and then finally just Kirk running from the floating blue godhead as it shoots at them with eye lightning is very underwhelming. Since the movie came out, William Shatner has blamed much of its failure on the budget, on the fact that the studio didn't give him enough money to shoot the movie he really wanted. There's almost certainly some truth to that. When you watch Star Trek V, you don't see a ton of money on the screen, relatively speaking, for a late 1980s major studio sci-fi movie anyway. But when you consider some of the things Shatner wanted to do but couldn't due to cost, those budgetary limitations start to look like blessings in disguise. I mean, would the climax of the movie really have been better with Kirk fighting a bunch of rock monsters? Regardless of how keenly you feel the absence of the evil rock monsters when you watch it, Star Trek V is not a good movie. And I'm willing to go along with the idea that it was the worst Star Trek movie in 1989. It was the first Star Trek movie that pretty much everybody, critics and general audiences, Trekkies and people who were just normal, agreed was bad. The only other Star Trek movie that received anywhere close to that negative of a reception at the time was Star Trek the Motion Picture, which didn't exactly light the world on fire. I have never been a huge fan of it myself, but it's miles better than Star Trek V. That was 1989, though. That was 35 years ago. To date, 8 more Star Trek movies have been produced since. Are you really going to tell me that no Star Trek movie made since Star Trek V is worse than Star Trek V? Really? Really? Despite how bad it is, Star Trek V does have a few things going for it. Qualities that, in my view, lifted above the genuine dregs of the Star Trek film series, even if only by a little bit. For a start, how about the start of the movie? It gets off to a solid beginning. We're introduced to Nimbus 3. There's that touch of biting irony in the Planet of Galactic Peace subtitle. The Planet of Galactic Peace, an inhospitable wasteland that's been forgotten by everybody. Not exactly a subtle metaphor, but when has Star Trek ever been known for those? Then we meet Sybok, who enters as a mysterious figure on a horse riding in from the horizon. The way his entrance is shot and cut is a little overwrought. Director Shatner pushes too hard to create drama and a sense of dread with repeated slow-mo shots of Sybok's horse galloping in, accompanied by spooky sounds. But once that and Sybok's quickie therapy session with Farmer John is over, we get a genuinely intriguing hook to take us into the opening credits. He's a Vulcan who laughs. Vulcans don't laugh. Why is this one laughing? Is he happy? Or a madman? Or both? What's going on here? What's going to happen? These are the kinds of questions you want an audience to be asking at the beginning of a movie. And sure, the movie mostly botches its efforts to realize the potential of that opening scene, but if you look beneath the contrivances, the plot holes, and the silliness that mostly falls flat, you'll find that this ineptly told story is built on a fairly solid structure. It's got good bones. Well, yeah, him too, but he's always good. What I mean by good bones in terms of story structure is the script sets things up that pay off later and throws obstacles in the ways of the heroes at exactly the right times. One obvious example of a setup and a payoff that I made light of during my snarky plot summary is the "I'll die alone" bit. Kirk introduces it during the campfire scene with McCoy and Spock, and it comes back at the end when Kirk is on the Klingon ship and he tells Spock, "I thought I was going to die," and Spock says, "Impossible, you were never alone." That's a nice moment. But here's my favorite example of a very well done setup and payoff in this movie. When Uhura shows up in a shuttlecraft to pick up Kirk, Spock, and McCoy and take them back to the Enterprise, we stay with them all the way up to the ship and watch as the shuttle completes a smooth, by-the-book landing in the hangar bay. Why do we see all of that? So we can get a beauty shot of the Enterprise as the shuttle approaches? Yes, because you can't get enough of those, can you? You'll never get sick of long, lingering passes over the hull of the goddamn ship, will you, nerd? Don't you have miniatures to paint or something? Wait, do it later. Watch the rest of this first. Obviously, yes, it provides the requisite beauty shot of the ship, but it also does something much more subtle and much more important. It establishes what a typical shuttle landing looks like, so that later on, when Sybok has hijacked the shuttle and the Klingons are on the scene preparing to attack the Enterprise, and Sulu has to fly the shuttle into the hangar bay at high speed without any of the standard procedures and protocols, we have some frame of reference. The significance of what happens in that second by the seat of their pants shuttle landing comes across because we've seen what it usually looks like. That's basic, mechanically sound story structure. So basic that it might not even seem worth mentioning, except for the fact that some writers neglect it, and that neglect comes through in the rest of their story. Star Trek V exhibits fundamentally sound story mechanics throughout its runtime. It doesn't always work as well in execution as the shuttlecraft landing setup and payoff. I could also mention Spock's rocket boots, which are introduced in the rock climbing scene so they can come back when it's time for them to fly up the elevator shaft. But it is a crucial aspect of the film, and without it, Star Trek V would have been so much worse. Another key ingredient, without which the movie would have been way worse, this guy. And by this guy, I mean both Sybok the character and Lawrence Luckinbill, the actor who plays him. Sybok still catches a lot of shit for being a bad character, most of it flung from those of you who just resumed watching this video because you didn't listen to me earlier and went to paint your miniatures anyway, didn't you, nerds? Thanks for coming back, I appreciate it. But I think he's a great character. Lots of Trekkies knocked him at the time and continue to knock him for being Spock's never-before-mentioned brother. Gene Roddenberry reportedly wasn't too fond of that either, but me? I don't care. Spock, a character in an action-adventure show, turns out to have a long-lost brother? Oh my god, what are we going to do? The fabric of reality is unraveling! Get a grip! Yes, it's hackneyed. But so are 1,000 other things about Star Trek. What matters to me isn't the fact that the creators of Star Trek V made Sybok to be Spock's brother. What matters to me is what they do with him on screen. Compared with most Star Trek movie villains, Sybok is original and unusually complex. He's the antagonist, but all things considered, he's not such a bad guy. He has many negative qualities. He's misguided, single-minded, egocentric, and oh yeah, a religiously fanatical cult leader who uses his small army of followers to commit acts of terrorism, but other than that, he never kills anybody. He never exhibits cruelty. He doesn't lead his people through intimidation or violence, and he doesn't want revenge. He's a villain who's motivated by something other than a desire for retribution against the hero, or society, or the institution that wronged him, or whatever. Spock mentions that Sybok was banished from Vulcan for his beliefs, but Sybok doesn't seem bothered by that. He's not carrying out this quest to find God because he wants to harness God's power to punish Vulcan for banishing him, or even to rub it in the faces of those who doubted him. He's carrying out the quest because he sincerely believes he's going to find God waiting for him at the end of it, and that's what he wants. It's an unusually pure motivation, particularly for a villain. Finally, when he reaches the end of his quest and stands face to face with the God he's been seeking all his life and realizes that actually this isn't God after all, Sybok admits that he's wrong. He has enough sanity, enough self-awareness to realize that he's been misled. When they all find themselves at the mercy of this angry false god, Sybok turns to Spock and says, "This is my fault. This is because of my arrogance." He asks Spock to forgive him, and then he fights the false god and ultimately sacrifices himself so that the others can get away. I couldn't care less about the cliched long-lost brother stuff. This is a great character, a villain with depth and a redemption arc that actually feels earned and deserved. And what a performance by Lawrence Luckinbill to bring this character to life. At every turn with Sybok, Luckinbill makes the interesting choice. When they're about to take the ship through the Great Barrier, which, for all they know, will destroy them, Kirk says to Sybok, "You're a madman." And Sybok replies with, "Am I?" And Luckinbill plays that moment honestly, thoughtfully, as though Sybok himself isn't sure at this point. Luckinbill imbues Sybok with some sinister traits. He does come across as a charismatic cult leader, and that makes him seem dangerous, but he also fills Sybok with the kind of unquestioning, impenetrable joy that only a true believer can feel. In Luckinbill's hands, Sybok's zealotry is unnerving, but somehow endearing at the same time. It's a really good performance in a pretty bad movie, and it lifts up that movie and makes it better. Speaking of better, you know who's a lot better than you'd probably expect him to be under these circumstances? William Shatner. Star Trek V is not his finest outing as an actor, for sure, but you'd think it would be way worse than this, right? You know the story of how Nicholas Meyer, the director of Star Trek II, was able to get such a good performance out of Shatner in that film, don't you? How Meyer would force Shatner to do take after take after take to tire him out, so that eventually he was too exhausted to keep doing the melodramatic Shatner-y stuff he usually does, and he'd start delivering solid, more understated takes. In Star Trek V, Shatner's directing himself. Who's a bigger fan of William Shatner's acting than William Shatner? This should have been a disaster, but it's not. Shatner reins himself in. As an actor, I mean. As a director and co-writer of the film's story, Shatner lets his ego run amok. Captain Kirk is the perfect hero. He makes no mistakes. Everything bad that happens to him is someone else's fault. He's the only one who sees through Sybok's share your pain routine. He learns nothing because he already knows it all, and the other heroic characters in the story are largely defined by their loyalty to him. But as an actor, Shatner turns in a mostly not bad performance, especially when he's interacting with Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley, which accounts for most of his scenes. He doesn't spend much time mingling with the riffraff in this one. Even when he seems to be teeing himself up for a big scenery-chewing Shatnerian display, he manages to underplay it. That scene where he rebuffs Sybok's attempt to relieve his pain is a good example. Kirk's key line, "I don't want my pain taken away, I need my pain," is delivered emphatically, but seriously, rather than theatrically over the top. He's also able to keep his ego, as an actor and a filmmaker, in check long enough to not dominate the showdown with God on Shakari. He takes center stage for the "what does God need with a starship" bit, rightfully seen as one of the most iconic and character-defining Captain Kirk moments in all of classic Trek, but he's also smart enough to step aside after that and let Sybok, and to a lesser degree Spock, carry the scene from there. The last positive quality of Star Trek V that I want to highlight is the presentation of the crew of the Enterprise and the interactions between those characters. This might sound off base at first, since neither William Shatner, the film's director, nor the film itself have ever been noted for how well they treated the supporting cast, And it's true, the movie is very much the Captain Kirk show, co-starring Spock and Dr. McCoy, which is fine. That's pretty much what Star Trek the original series was. Still, the supporting cast does feel neglected here, especially after how well they were utilized in the previous films. Star Treks 3 and 4 in particular found ways of featuring the more junior members of the Enterprise crew that allowed them to shine and contribute to the story without it feeling obligatory. In Star Trek V, unfortunately, obligatory is exactly how a lot of the business handed the supporting cast feels. And yet, despite that, I've always felt a sense of camaraderie between the crew in Star Trek V that isn't quite there in the other films, or at least isn't there in quite the same way. It comes across in the little moments. How Uhura hands Kirk his communicator at the campsite, which they both know he intentionally didn't bring with him on shore leave. The way Kirk puts his hand on Sulu's shoulder to include him in the landing party at Nimbus 3. Even the Scotty and Uhura romance, which feels completely out of left field in the larger context of the series, plays in the moment like two people who have known each other for a long time, navigating an unexplored territory of their relationship. There's a comfort, a casualness to how Kirk interacts with the rest of the crew, how the crew interacts with Kirk and with each other. These people have served together for a long time. They're familiar with each other. They trust each other. They are at ease with each other. It's not as easy as it looks to achieve that friendly, easygoing on-screen vibe, particularly since tensions between the cast members were at an all-time high during the making of Star Trek V. This is the production where they staged a press conference on the bridge set with everyone appearing in costume, and Shatner, the star and director of the film, introduces his castmates to the assembled media and forgets Walter Koenig's name.
And the gentleman who plays Chekhov.
Walter Koenig.
He's only known the guy for 20 years at this point. These people did not like each other. Well, technically, most of these people did not like William Shatner. They got along fine otherwise, for the most part. Does that dislike come across on screen? No, it doesn't. The cast of Star Trek may have hated William Shatner, but the crew of the Starship Enterprise in Star Trek V loves Captain Kirk. If you ask me, it's some of the finest acting in the franchise. Do all of those positive qualities add up to a good movie? No. With Star Trek V, the positives are decidedly outweighed by the negatives, but for me, when you acknowledge those positives and give them due consideration, it's obvious that Star Trek V, while a bad movie, is not the worst of the Star Trek movies, not even close. It's cliched, it's corny, a lot of it falls flat, and it's clear that William Shatner made creative decisions that prioritized himself ahead of the story, but on the other hand, it gets off to a great start. It has a fantastic villain, it has a surprisingly good performance from a self-directed William Shatner, some classic Captain Kirk moments that Trekkies still reference fondly today regardless of how they feel about the rest of the movie, and it's less than 2 hours long, so even if it's not the most exciting thing you've ever seen, it doesn't have a chance to wear out its welcome. Perhaps most importantly of all, it has heart and a quintessentially Star Trekian optimism about the world and the people in it. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are able to resist Sybok's mind-control memory immersion because of their loyalty to each other. They win through the power of friendship. Kirk proclaims that our pain, our flaws, our regrets are part of us, not mistakes that need to be corrected. Sybok finds redemption through sacrifice. Claw, grudgingly, apologizes for attacking the Enterprise, and the movie ends with two groups that have been in conflict, Kirk's crew and the Klingons, gathering together in peace. At the end of their quest, our heroes don't find God, but they do find two things that are much more important and much more real: affirmation of their faith in each other, and hope for the future. What's more Star Trek than that? So there you have it. The case for Star Trek V being not as bad as you remember. Not a good movie, but not the worst Star Trek movie. Actually, I kind of wish it was the worst Star Trek movie, because that would mean that Star Trek Generations and Star Trek Nemesis either didn't exist or were just a lot better than they actually are. Which would be nice, because sitting through either one of those is painful. Shit, Sybok, my man, can you take that pain away? Those are two weights I could stand to have lifted from my heart, let me tell you. No, wait. I'm a Trekkie. I know better than this. Bad Star Trek movies and episodes can't be taken away with the wave of a magic wand. We carry them with us. They're part of what makes us who we are. If we lose them, we lose ourselves. I don't want my shitty Star Trek taken away. I need my shitty Star Trek. Could probably stand to lose that one. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this one. I'm gonna let you know what the subject of the next Trek Actually video is gonna be, but before I do that, I want to give shoutouts to some of my newest Patreon patrons and channel members. First, the new patrons. They are Matthew Sterner Neely. Thanks, Matthew. The Salmon Moose. Thanks, The Salmon Moose. Dan Harrington. Thanks, Dan. Ken F. Thanks, Ken. Henchman21. Thanks, Henchman21. Phil Sund. Thanks, Phil. Jim Bertrand. Thanks, Jim. Christian Dalcio. Thanks, Christian. Logan J. McMillan. Thanks, Logan. Grumpy Dragon 75. Thanks, Grumpy Dragon 75. Lou S. Thanks, Lou. Nicholas Black. Thanks, Nicholas. Jack. Thanks, Jack. Coret Mulder. Thanks, Coret. Sojus. Thanks, Sojus. Freak. Thanks, Freak. Stephen Hayen. Thanks, Stephen. Stephen Whitaker. Thanks, Stephen. Tom Baresh. Thanks, Tom. And now for the new channel members. They are Trinity. Thanks, Trinity. Corbin. Thanks, Corbin. Renee Casely. Thanks, Renee. Marion Austin. Thanks, Marion. Post JM9. Thanks, Post JM9. Stephanie Nelson Davis. Thanks, Stephanie. Jan. Thanks, Jan. TMFJ. Thanks, TMFJ. Steve Coleman. Thanks, Steve. Kimba Anderson. Thanks, Kimba. Art Deco. Thanks, Art Deco. Ethan Horn. Thanks, Ethan. If you want to support this channel, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives or clicking the join button to become a member of this channel. All patrons and members get access to exclusive posts that allow you to vote in the polls that determine upcoming Trek Actually topics and also submit questions ahead of time for my twice monthly Ask Away live streams. If you pledge $5 a month or more on Patreon, or become a member at the $5 a month tier or higher, you get a shout out at the end of a Trek Actually video. If you'd rather give a one-time gift than a recurring monthly contribution, you're always more than welcome to do that by clicking the thanks button right below the video or via PayPal or Venmo. The links for those are in the video description. Many thanks. If you like what I do on YouTube, especially the Star Trek related stuff, you should also check out my side projects, The Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed comedy podcast that I'm on alongside Jason Harding and Dana Cole, and Trek Reluctantly, the watch-along stream Dana and I do every Wednesday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern on this channel right here. As always, links in the description. Now, for next month's Regulation Trek Actually topic, which is not a complete departure from this month. You have to squint a little, but there's a faint, gossamer-like thread of connection. Okay, here's what I mean. This month, we talked about Star Trek V, right? And the villain of Star Trek V is Sybok, Spock's long-lost brother. Well, next month's video is also going to be about siblings, counterparts of the main characters. The topic of that video, as chosen by my Patreon patrons and channel members, is who is actually Star Trek's best/worst evil twin? See? Sybok doesn't quite qualify, but it's somewhere in the ballpark, right? Twins, evil twins, should be fun. That's next month. I'll be back then and a bunch of times before then. So until the next time you see me, whenever that is, thanks for watching and take care, everybody.